Hi, how is everybody? So we're back here today. I had every intention of doing a series about feminism in today's society, but I think with everything going on, I think it was really time to talk about some of the important social issues that are happening, particularly politically at the minute. So we're talking today and for the next several episodes about the similarities between the historical lead up to war, how this relates to poverty and inequality, and masculinity, and really what we can do to stop this awful shift in society, and to hopefully, if people start being nice to one another, we can move towards something more positive and away from the potential of World War III, because nobody wants that, do we? I've got a horrible fear of my boys being called up to a horrible war that's been started for some sort of agenda that is completely out of our hands. So we're talking about that a little bit today. So history, it can seem obvious in hindsight. If we look back to the 1930s, knowing what came next, war, genocide, political collapse, but people living through that decade didn't have the advantage of hindsight. What they felt was fear of loss, insecurity about the future, and a sense that old social certainties were breaking apart. So today we face economic pressures, rising inequality, social fragmentation, disharmony, a lack of social cohesion. And if we misread these pressures, if we treat fear as moral failure instead of a signal, we risk repeating past patterns, not because history literally repeats, but because the underlying conditions can produce similar social dynamics. This isn't a partisan argument. I'm not left or right when I say this. I'm talking as a sociologist. So this is a sociological warning. So let's dive in. And we'll start with the material reality that's facing ordinary people. The cost of living and inflation. Despite official inflation falling towards target levels, the cumulative squeeze on living standards remains intense. So the price of food, it's ridiculous. How expensive things are. It's €10 here for a steak. It's €9 for a bottle of shampoo. Energy is increasing regularly. Rent increases, and essentials are all significantly more expensive than they were a few years ago. So importantly, low-income households are now experiencing higher annual inflation than high-income households, a reversal of recent years. And that means the people who could least afford it are feeling the greatest burden. Real household incomes fell over recent years and material deprivation has increased. More people now cannot afford basic goods and services, including energy and food. Like, how many times have we heard of our friends and neighbours that are struggling to pay their electricity bills that have skyrocketed over the last few years? Nearly 1 in 6 workers report struggling to pay their bills, with many households holding second jobs and worrying about job security. Home ownership has become out of reach for most families. In England, average house prices now require more than 8 years of income. In London, it can exceed 14 years, and the same is happening in Ireland. Dublin, house prices are still rising, making it just impossible for people to get on the housing ladder. So figures that make ownership unreachable for almost anyone but the very wealthy and those people that buy up all the houses to then rent them out at increasingly extortionate rates. So historians like Robert Paxton, Karl Polanyi and Hannah Arendt, all from very different perspectives, point to the same lesson. Material instability breeds social anxiety, and anxiety is that fertile ground for this horrible political polarisation that we're seeing in society. In the 1930s, extreme economic distress didn't immediately produce ideologues, it produced fear. Rapid shifts in social status and displacement created a crisis of identity. Traditional institutions failed to provide security or meaning. Only after these conditions took hold did politics, whether far left or far right, become the vehicle for unresolved fears. So you can see this pattern in many contexts. People don't create radical politics first. It's that they turn to radical politics because the other structures have failed. So we see that it's not the politics here. It's the social conditions that create these extreme politics and the emergence of people like Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. This is a response to social decline. So here's the key sociological insight. When the pie is shrinking, people don't want others to take a bigger share. They want to feel secure in that little slice that they already have. This isn't inherently racist or extremist. It's genuine anxiety over the loss of status. So people feel like if someone else gains, i.e., immigrants come and take a little share of that pie, then I lose. My community is left behind, and ultimately, I don't recognise the world anymore. This is how people are feeling at the minute. And these are social and psychological facts, not moral failings. So it's not the fault of these people. They're feeling insecure because of these declining social circumstances. And when institutions, economic, political, cultural, they don't address material insecurity, so they don't address this massive inequality in society, people look for answers elsewhere, and they turn to things like identity politics, scapegoating, conspiracy, simplified narratives. And this process creates the very polarisation that we fear and that we're experiencing at the minute. So I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that the world is the same as 1930s Europe. We're saying that some underlying pressures that historically preceded social breakdown are visible today. So the rising cost of living and material insecurity, housing that's out of reach for most people, there's a higher inflation burden on the poorest, the job market pressures and wage stagnation that we see in certain sectors. These create status anxiety and a sense of exclusion, not because people choose to hate, but because systems no longer guarantee security and dignity. So what I'm suggesting here is that we need to address this seriously, these concerns and the situations that have created this fear among the poorest people that then sort of shows itself symptomatically as these far-right politics and aggressive nationalism. So alongside this, we need to talk about something that rarely gets enough airtime, well, I think anyway, but it's the relationship between economic shifts and masculinity. So for much of the 20th century, many men's identities were tied to being in stable employment, being a positive provider and playing that role within the family, and that gave them social meaning. So when that disappears through deindustrialization, unstable labour markets or economic restructuring, something fills that identity void. Something has to fill that void. And often what fills it is grievance and anger, not really reflection on what's brought them to this situation right now. And this helps to explain why masculine narratives and online communities, so these people that are being radicalized in male-dominated communities to really hate and distrust women, these things start to grow. So people like Andrew Tate and all those horrible men, they sort of become paramount in these times of economic insecurity. So this is a product of that. So also reactionary politics, they appeal to certain working class men, not merely because of ideology, it's not really about that, but it's because of this emotional insecurity that people are feeling at the minute. And in that kind of insecurity, it seeks a narrative that makes sense of this loss, the loss of their role in society. So this is an attack on men. It's a kind of social diagnosis of how identities form under this kind of economic and social pressure. So I want to be clear here that extremism isn't acceptable. None of what I'm describing excuses racism, xenophobia, violence, misogyny, and they're all real harms that must be opposed for a normally functioning society. But what I am saying is that if we treat this fear as moral failure instead of a social symptom, we miss the root causes of why it's happening. And when we don't address the root causes, polarisation deepens, resentment festers, and people become more susceptible to kind of these simplistic narratives like stop the boats and make America great again. And so regardless of this political label, we need to sort of address the underlying causes here. So what is this video really about? It's a warning, ultimately, not to suggest that history repeats, but that structural pressures can undermine social cohesion, especially if we ignore them. So if we want to build a future that isn't defined by fear, we need to prioritise economic security and really push. There's this great podcaster, YouTuber called Gary, I don't know his last name, but he does Gary's Economics. He's often on the TV at the minute, and he's pushing this narrative that the issues here in society are, most of them can be most of them stem back to the inequality gap, wealth inequality gap. So the billionaires are keeping and retaining and purchasing more and more assets. That's meaning that there's less and less for everybody else. So we're losing the middle classes. Everybody's in a situation now where we have everybody and then very, very rich people. So it's these issues that need to be tackled. And once everybody has enough, they feel confident in their positions in society, in their identities, that they can provide for their families, that they have job security, that they are not sharing an increasingly small slice of this pie with migrants, then there will be peace and social cohesion, and we'll move away from this extreme politics that we're seeing today. So what we need to do, we need to reinforce institutions that provide dignity for those people that are feeling anxiety and fear about their social circumstances. And we need to treat this social anxiety as a signal of this deteriorating social structural inequality. So it's not a sin, not as a sin. So we don't treat these people that are thinking in these extreme ways as people that are criminals and harbouring well, they are often harbouring unsafe and poisonous politics, but this is a symptom of their situations. And if we change that situation, these people can be saved from this awful fate. So history doesn't repeat because morality fails. It repeats because societies ignore this material reality, this social decline. Right guys, so that's it for today, and I hope that sort of strikes a chord with people. It's easy for us to kind of look at this sort of really polarised politics at the minute and to pick a side and really put all of our eggs in that basket and fight against these kind of radical others, whichever side you're on. But the thing that I'm asking us to do is to look at the reasons that underlie these feelings, particularly from people that appear to have really radical politics, and try and help them. It's an expression, it's a symptom of this systemic failure. So understanding this, tackling this inequality will help society. So I'm hoping that we can just be kinder to those people, recognise their situation, and help them through this kind of difficult, unsettling period that they're in their lives right now. All right, thank you, bye-bye.